framed it and hung it on the wall, with a caption reading the lovebirds relaxing after a hard day. I couldn't help but chuckle and told her I actually had taken a photo on my phone just before I left. She was eager to see it, so I pulled out my phone and showed her. She burst out, laughing, practically doubling over. We had a great time and I invited her to dinner at my place. The following night, she gladly accepted. The next evening, we had dinner at my apartment. Afterward, we settled on the couch and put on a movie. Somewhere in the middle of the film, I realized we were holding hands. I don't even know when it happened or how I glanced over at her and found her looking back at me. She caught the look on my face and asked, "Ever wonder how things would have turned out for us if my dad hadn't moved us to Colorado every other day since I saw you again, when I came in to sign the lease?" I replied. She smiled softly. "Do you think there's still something between us?" I hesitated, then said, "I'd like to think so, but I'm not jumping into anything until I'm officially rid of Grace." "Why wait if you're done with her?" "You're done with her," she said. "Maybe, but I'm still married. I made vows, and I'm trying to honor that, at least until it's legally over." I answered, but she broke hers. Wendy pointed out, "Doesn't that set you free?" "You're right, but I'm not wired that way. I screwed up by not letting them serve me the papers. Yet once I'm served, sign the papers and send them back. Then I'll feel free of my vows, but it's not as simple as flipping a switch. I love that woman and I thought she loved me too." I paused, then added, "Some people can turn off love like a light switch, but not me. It's going to take a while to get over Grace. We had 8 years together and I thought they were good years. I just need to get through all the legal stuff first." "How long do you think that'll take?" "Wendy asked the papers are ready, so technically I just have to make myself available to be served." I suppose the quickest way would be to walk into her office and ask for them, but I'm not quite ready to do that. Plus, part of me is still enjoying screwing with her a bit, keeping her in the dark. I leaned back on the couch and sighed. When you really think about it, there's no rush. We need time to get to know each other again. It's been 12 years since we were separated, and we're different people now. And let's be honest, there's a big elephant in the room. I was in love with Grace. I thought we had a solid marriage until she blindsided me with her affair, and here's the kicker. The night before that happened, we made love 3 times. She knew what she was going to do, but she still kissed me goodbye the next morning and told me to have a great day. I shook my head, pushing the memories away. Enough about that. I've decided not to hide from Grace anymore. If she finds me, she finds me. Now let's talk about our first official date. What would you like to do? Wendy grinned. "That depends if it's the weekend dinner and dancing. If it's a weekday dinner and a movie." "All right, how about this? My Thursdays are booked until September, so let's do dinner and a movie on Wednesday and then dinner and dancing on Saturday." "Sounds perfect," she said. "But what about Friday? We can figure that out on Wednesday." I suggested. "Nope, let's settle it now. How about dinner at my place on Friday? Isn't that a bit too much of me in such a short time?" I teased. "If I have my way, I'm going to end up with all of your time anyway." She shot back with a smile. "Then I guess Friday is covered," I said, grinning. Wednesday's date with Wendy went well, ending with a soft, unexpected kiss when I dropped her off at her place. Feeling more at ease with my decision not to hide from Grace anymore, I decided to go ahead and show up at the bowling alley on Thursday. Initially, I had thought about stepping away from the team since a few of Grace's friends bowled in the same league. I didn't want them running back to her and telling her I hadn't disappeared after all. Our league was mixed, and one of the women worked with Grace, while another guy and girl had gone to school with her and still kept in touch. As luck would have it, that Thursday night, our team was up against the team that included Grace's coworker. Knowing my name might come up at Grace's office the next day, I figured I might as well stir the pot a little. During one of the breaks, I casually asked Holly, Grace's coworker, if she knew how long Grace's thing with her boss had been going on. Her face gave her away, but she just shrugged and said, "I don't know what you're talking about." No need to play coy. I said Grace and Dixon already laid their cards on the table. She wants a divorce so she can marry him. I'm just curious how long she's been keeping me in the dark. I never saw it coming. Holly hesitated, then finally said, "I'd guess about 8 months. Honestly, we all think she's crazy to give you up for that guy. Is it true? You kicked him in the crotch?" I just smiled without confirming or denying it. Then she asked, "Are you going to fight the divorce? Why fight for someone who doesn't want me?" I replied. Holly leaned in a bit, grinning. "So once this is all over, do you think I might have a shot when you're ready to start dating again?" I laughed. I'll keep you in mind. But honestly, by the time I'm back on the market, I doubt someone like you will still be available. She gave me a playful smirk. I've heard good things are worth waiting for. Think you'd be able to work with Grace if we ended up together? I asked. I'd love to see her regret leaving you. Once she realizes what a mistake she made, it'll be fun to watch her squirm. Holly said, here's hoping. I said, nodding. I'd like to see that too. All in all, it was a pretty good night. My team won 2 out of the 3 games. I hit a lucky jackpot with a 217 in the second game, and my ego got a boost from the attention of someone as attractive as Holly. Friday's date with Wendy was nice, but Saturdays, that's where things took a turn. We started the evening with dinner at Duke's Steakhouse and then headed over to the Honky Tonk Hall for some dancing. The Honky Tonk Hall was a country western place that featured live bands on the weekends. Carlos Washington was playing that night, and Wendy and I were on the dance floor doing the cowboy cha-cha when I saw Alice Turner, Grace's sister, walk in. She was with her boyfriend and some guy I didn't recognize, and they ended up taking the table right next to ours. That wasn't the worst part, though. The worst part came when moments after they sat down. Grace joined them. I'd already made peace with not hiding from her, but seriously, of all the tables she had to sit at the one right next to mine, and where was Eric? Was she already stepping out on him? I assumed the unknown guy was her date for the night. I leaned in and gave Wendy a heads up. She just laughed and said, "This is going to be interesting." As the music ended, we made our way back to our table. Grace still had her back to us, but Alice was facing our direction. The surprise on her face when she saw me was obvious, but she didn't say anything to Grace because she never turned around. I had already decided at that point that I wasn't going to stick around. I'd leave without paying the tab. The next was a waltz, and Alice, along with the rest of her group, headed out onto the dance floor. That's when Grace spotted me. The shock on her face was unmistakable, but her dance partner had her by the arm, leading her onto the floor. She never took her eyes off me as they danced around the room. When the song ended, the band announced they were taking a break. Alice and her group returned to their table, and that's when Grace decided to confront me. "Who's your friend, Frank?" she said, her voice dripping with sarcasm. I smiled. "You remember Wendy, don't you, from the leasing office?" Grace glanced at Wendy and sneered. "Do you always date married men?" Wendy laughed and shot back, "Only the ones whose stupid wives throw them away." Grace's face flushed with anger. She turned back to me, her voice sharper. "What are you even doing here?" "Frank, I thought you left town. I'm here to drink and dance," I replied calmly. "Same reason anyone else comes here. I suppose clearly I haven't left since you're standing here, talking to me. Where are you living?" "That's none of your business." "Gray, why don't you head back to your table?" "I'd rather enjoy my time with my date." Her voice grew tense. "You know, I hate being called Gray tough luck." "Gray," I said flatly. "After what you and your sleazy boss pulled. I don't care what you like. Does Eric know you're out with another man tonight? Maybe I should give him a heads up." Grace's eyes narrowed. "I don't have a date. I'm just here for a drink with Alice and Randy. I didn't know Bill would be with them." I raised my voice just enough to be heard by the next table. "Hey, Alice is Bill Grace's date tonight." Alice shifted uncomfortably. "I'm not getting involved." Frank, her lack of response told me everything I needed to know. "Thanks for clearing that up," I said with a smirk. Grace's face flushed with frustration. "I'm not." Before she could finish, Wendy interrupted her, her tone firm. "If you don't want to get into a hair-pulling contest with me, I suggest you get away from our table now." Grace shot us a nasty glare before storming back to her seat. Wendy smiled at me, a gleam of mischief in her eyes. I haven't had this much fun in ages. The band returned, and we hit the dance floor for a couple more numbers. By the time we returned to our table, Alice and her group were gone. As we sat down, Wendy asked, "Are you really thinking about telling Grace's lawyer boyfriend about her and this Bill guy?" I shook my head. "Nah, if she's cheating on him, he's getting what he deserves. He's a cheater himself after all. I mean, he did start this whole thing by getting involved with a married woman, right? I'll let her sweat it out, though maybe let her wonder if I'll ever mention it to him. It could stir things up between them. Maybe he'll start thinking that whole wants a cheater, always a cheater thing." Wendy laughed. "You've got a deliciously wicked mind, don't you?" I just smiled. Later, when I dropped Wendy off, she gave me a hot, lingering kiss. As I drove home, I found myself wondering if there was potential for something real between us. We had shared something back in high school, but was it just youthful infatuation, or could it be something more? The following day. I called Alice and asked her to meet me at the bar. After I got off work, I told you. Frank, I don't want to get involved, she said. I'm not asking you to get involved. I just need to talk to you about something, and it's not about Grace, all right? She agreed, but if you bring up Grace or anything between you two, I'm leaving fair. Enough, I said. I got to Bud's a little early and decided the best approach would be to simply hand her the box with the jewelry and let things go from there. That way I wouldn't be the one to bring up Grace first and risk Alice getting up to leave. When Alice arrived, she spotted me and walked over. I already had her usual drink waiting on the table. She sat down, took a sip, and looked at me. Okay, Frank, what's this all about? She asked, without a word. I picked up the box from the seat next to me and placed it in front of her. What's this? She asked. Open it and see for yourself. I said. She set her drink down, opened the box, and immediately recognized what was inside her. I had just gotten home after a long day at work, expecting to find my wife Grace in the kitchen preparing dinner. Grace also worked, but she usually got off by 5 while I didn't make it back until closer to 6. Typically she'd have dinner ready by the time I arrived. We'd eat together, talk about our day, maybe watch a little TV, and eventually head to bed. Most nights we'd end the day by making love. But today when I walked into the apartment, the scene was far from what I had expected. Grace was sitting on the couch, not alone, but with Eric Dixon. Eric worked as an attorney at Summit Law Partners, where Grace was employed as a secretary. I noticed they were holding hands, before I could even ask what was going on. Grace spoke up. Sit down. Frank, we need to talk about what and why. The hell are you holding hands with your boss? Grace's eyes flicked toward Eric, who gave her a slight nod before she continued. That's exactly what we need to talk about. Please just sit down. I think I'd rather stand. I said, feeling a knots of tension forming in my chest. With a deep breath, she said, there's no easy way to say this, but the truth is Eric and I have fallen in love. I'm filing for divorce and I'm going to marry him. Eric's already taken care of all the legal paperwork. All you need to do is sign. I'm not asking for anything, just my clothes, jewelry, and personal items. Once you sign, it'll be over in 90 days. Eric reached for the paper sitting next to him on the couch and started walking towards me. He opened his mouth to speak. Frank, you just need to. But before he could finish, my right foot shot out and landed squarely in his crotch. He doubled over, instantly dropping the papers as he cradled his groin and as he bent forward. I didn't hesitate. I brawled up my fist and swung, connecting with his jaw. He collapsed to the floor. You miserable piece of garbage, I shouted, kicking him again. It doesn't matter if she came after you or you pursued her. You knew she was married. Grace just sat there too, stunned to say anything. Eric was lying on the floor, groaning in pain. I turned to her, fury coursing through my veins, and yanked her off the couch. She struggled, yelling. I dragged her into the bedroom, ignoring her protests. I threw her face down onto the bed and pinned her there while I ripped the bedsheet into strips with the torn fabric. I tied her wrists and gagged her, preventing her from saying anything else. Then I went back to the living room, grabbed Eric by the collar and dragged him into the bedroom as well. I tossed him onto the bed beside Grace and tied him up too. As I stood there looking at them, I started laughing. The absurdity of the situation hitting me like a wave. How about this? The two lovers in bed together while the husband stands by watching kinky ha. They watched me in silence as I packed up my things, cleaning out my dresser and closet. Before leaving the room, I snapped a quick photo of the two of them bound on the bed. Don't go anywhere, all right? I sneered. I grabbed whatever I could in a hurry and loaded it into my truck. I'd come back for the bigger stuff later. Once the truck was packed, I went back inside and rummaged through Grace's purse. I took her money and credit cards before heading back to the bedroom. One last time, they were still there, struggling against their bonds. I watched for a moment before saying, when I reach the city limits, I'll call someone to come help you. If I'm lucky, I'll never have to see either of you again, or maybe I'll wait until I'm 1,000 miles away before making the call. Either way, you'll only have to wait a year to file for divorce on the grounds of abandonment. In the meantime, enjoy your cuddle time. And with that, I left. As I drove away, I asked myself why I'd reacted like such an asshole. But deep down, I knew the reason. It wasn't just that Grace wanted out. I could have accepted that if she had come to me and told me she had fallen in love with someone else. I wouldn't have liked it, but I would have let her go. What stung the most was how they had handled it, sitting there together, holding hands and presenting me with divorce papers as if it were just another business transaction. It was too cold, too calculated, and that I couldn't forgive. But I wasn't done messing with them just yet. I had come home expecting dinner to be ready, and since that didn't happen, I decided to head to the village inn for a meal. After I'd finished my dessert, I planned to call Grace's sister Alice, and let her be the one to deal with. The aftermath let her find Grace and her lover tied up together. It seemed like the perfect way to spread the story. As I sat there eating, my mind couldn't help but wonder if Grace was so in love with her boss. Why had she still been sleeping with me? Like nothing had changed right up until that little scene in our living room. I'd probably never get an answer to that question. After finishing my apple pie, I made the call to Alice. I told her that I'd left her sister and her sister's lover tied up in our apartment bedroom. Then I hung up before she could ask any questions. Hopefully the 1,000 miles away line would convince them I was long gone, keeping them from searching for me. In reality, I wasn't going far, just to the other side of town. I left the restaurant and checked into a comfort lodge for the night. Then I made another call, this time to my boss at home. I explained the situation to him, told him I needed the next couple of days off, and asked him to play along if Grace called. I wanted him to say I'd quit suddenly, mumbled something about Florida, and took off. He agreed but added, "You know she'll eventually spot you around town, or someone will tell her they saw you, right?" "Yeah, I know," I said, "but this is just about screwing with her for as long as I can. Might only last a day or two, but I'll take it." The next morning I hit the bank only to find that Grace hadn't exactly been honest with me. She claimed she only wanted her clothes and personal stuff, but she'd already been in the day before and withdrawn half of our checking and savings. I checked the safe deposit box next and found that she had apparently forgotten about it. The certificates of deposit were still there, along with another opportunity to get back at her. The certificates of deposit totaled $12,000, money we had been saving for a down payment on a house. We had each been contributing 10% of our net income into savings, and once we reached $2,000, we bought a certificate of deposit. The goal was to save $20,000, but the real treasure was inside the box. Family jewelry passed down from Grace's great-great-grandmother. The collection had been appraised at $82,000. The jewelry had always been a point of tension between Grace and her sister Alice. Alice believed she was entitled to half, while Grace insisted that as the firstborn, it rightfully belonged to her and would eventually be passed down to her daughter whenever she had one. Grace was going to be furious when she realized the jewelry was gone. I decided I'd keep it until she noticed, let her throw her tantrum, and then hand it over to Alice. In the morning, I rented a U-Haul and waited until I knew Grace had left for work. I swung by the apartment to grab the heavier items I wanted when my key didn't work. I cursed myself for calling Alice before the hardware stores had closed. Still, it was my name on the lease, and I hadn't been served with any kind of restraining order yet, so I had every right to be there. Breaking in wasn't too difficult. I'd have to pay for the damage to the door later, but that was the least of my concerns at the moment. Within 45 minutes, I had everything I needed packed and loaded into the U-Haul. I moved it all into a storage unit. An hour later, before leaving the apartment, I called and canceled our joint credit cards. Then I contacted Grace from the property management company to inform her about the broken door. I told her I'd call back in a few days to arrange for the repair costs. I had known Wendy for years, so when she asked what happened, I told her everything. She laughed and said, "Wait, you actually left them tied up in bed together? That's priceless. This story is going to spread like wildfire. Looks like you're free now for me." I couldn't help but smile. "And what about Luke?" She shrugged. "He pulled the same stunt Grace did, hooked up with some woman from his office and told me he loved her more than me. Do you still have my number?" "I do." "Well, don't hesitate to use it. When you're ready, we'll catch up later." Afterward, I stopped by the library and checked out a stack of books. My plan was simple: stay low, work during the day, and spend my evenings reading. The less I was out and about, the less likely Grace, or anyone she might have sent to find me, would spot me realistically. I couldn't afford to stay in the motel for long, so I called Wendy again. She pointed me to a quiet apartment complex on the opposite side of town from my old place. She even called the manager to smooth the way for me. Within a few days I had moved into the new place, hoping to remain under the radar. I knew staying in town was risky from past conversations with Grace. I knew Dixon was close to securing a partnership at the law firm, and I was banking on the fact that he wouldn't want to risk the scandal that could arise if he pressed charges for the assault. Bringing that kind of attention to his affair with a married employee could jeopardize his career. I was betting that he'd convince Grace not to file any charges either, just to keep things quiet. By the end of the week, I had settled into my new apartment. My boss informed me that Grace had called, and he had played along with the story about me moving to Florida. That gave me a good laugh. Around 11. I called Wendy to ask about the bill for the broken door. She told me not to worry. Grace had already taken care of it. Then she added, with a teasing tone, "So when are we going on our first date?" I chuckled. "I'm trying to keep a low profile." "Remember," she laughed, "come over to my place for dinner tonight. We'll talk about old times, and you won't have to worry about being spotted." "What time? 6 sounds good." She gave me directions, and I told her I'd be there. As I drove to Wendy's place, memories of her started flooding back. We had dated on and off throughout high school and almost made it to the going steady stage. Her hand had been the first female hand to touch me intimately, and I had been her first in a few ways too. Before we could take things further, her dad got a promotion, and her family moved out of state. I hadn't known she was back in town until I ran into her at the apartment manager's office, but by that time I was already married to Grace. I arrived at her place right on time. We sat at her kitchen table talking while she finished up dinner. Wendy shared stories about her move to Colorado after her dad's promotion and how much she had loved it out there. She confessed she still dreamed of moving back one day. "If you loved it so much, why didn't you just stay?" I asked. She sighed. "My dad was killed in an industrial accident and my mom was a wreck. She needed me, so I came back with her. She's doing better now, but I haven't been able to save up enough to move back yet. Someday, though, I'm still hoping." Wendy wanted the full rundown on Grace, and I didn't hold back. She laughed when I finished and joked that I should have taken a picture of them tied up in bed, blown it up. Expressions softened as she lifted a diamond necklace from the box, turning it over in her hands. "Mom used to let me wear this when I was a kid playing dress up." "Where did you find it?" I explained how I came into possession of the jewelry and added, "I know you always thought you should have gotten half when your mom passed, so now it's all yours. You can keep half and give the other half to Grace if you want, or keep all of it. Whether you tell her or not is up to you. When she finally remembers the safe deposit box is empty, she'll come asking and I'll just tell her I pawned it." Alice gave me a curious look. "Why didn't you pawn it? Then that would have really hit her where it hurts." I shook my head. I couldn't do that. "Jewels, those are family heirlooms, and as much as I wanted to get back at Grace, it would feel wrong taking them away from you. You've always been good to me, and I couldn't steal from you like that." Alice smiled softly, honestly, Frank. "I've always thought I should have met you first." Before Grace did, she placed the necklace back in the box and looked at me gratefully. "You don't know how much this means to me." "Frank, thank you." She stood up, clutching the box, and with a parting smile, she said, "Stay in touch." Frank, before heading out the door, "It couldn't have played out better if I'd planned it." The very next day, Grace showed up at my job. She walked straight up to me, eyes blazing. "Where's my jewelry?" she demanded. "How'd you know I was here?" I asked, taken aback when I realized you hadn't left town. "I figured this is where you'd be now. Where's my jewelry?" "I got rid of it," I replied casually. Grace's face tightened in anger. "What do you mean? You got rid of it?" "That jewelry was mine." "You had no right." "I think I did," I said calmly. "The money I got when I pawned it helped cover what you took out of our accounts." Her face turned pale. "Wait, you pawned it?"
"Yep,"
I said without hesitation. "Damn you." "Frank, you had no right to do that," she nearly shouted. "I disagree. You lied to me. You said all you wanted were your personal belongings, clothes, jewelry, that kind of stuff. You never mentioned the money." She crossed her arms, clearly frustrated. "Come on. Frank, you should have known I wanted my share of the money. Lots of things I should have known. Grace liked the fact that my wife was a cheating, backstabbing liar, but I didn't. And let's be clear, you didn't just take your share. You took more than half." "No, I didn't. There was $16400 and $25.48 in the account. You took $8,300, which is $87.26 more than your half. So I pawned your jewelry to cover that." Now, where even her eyes widened, 87.26 cents. "Frank, that jewelry was worth over $55,000. I shrugged. "Was it? Well, I guess that's my loss. But here's the thing. According to the pawn shop, you've got 60 days to redeem it. Actually, it's 51 now. So I'll make you a deal. I'll sell you the pawn ticket for $11,000. Grace stared at me in disbelief. "How am I supposed to come up with that kind of money?" I smiled faintly. "Maybe your new man will help you out." Her eyes narrowed. Or I could just call the police and tell them you stole my jewelry. Go ahead. I said calmly, do you have anything proving that the jewelry was in the safe deposit box? Anything at all that shows you even had it now. Get out of your grace. This is a place of business and you're causing a scene. This isn't over. Frank, I glared at her, leave. Or I'll be the one calling the police, she shot back. I'll just report you for assaulting me and Eric. I smirked, do that, and I'll sue Eric for alienation of affection and go after the law firm for not enforcing their policy against supervisors. Having relationships with subordinates that would hurt Eric's chances of ever becoming a partner, wouldn't it best? You just leave grace before you make things worse for yourself. And here's something to think about. If you'd just been upfront with me, told me you didn't love me anymore, I would have been hurt, sure, but I would have let you go without all this drama now. Get out. Grace gave me a long, hard look before turning and walking out. Did I think she was done stirring the pot? Not for a second. I knew Grace better than she realized she wasn't going to let this go. She'd try to find a way to get to me where I couldn't fight back, but I didn't think she'd succeed. At least I hoped I wasn't wrong. The next day a man showed up at my workplace and asked for me. Katie, our receptionist, paged me, and when I arrived at the front desk, she pointed to a man studying one of the plaques on the wall. I approached him and asked, "Can I help you?" "Frank Keller?" he asked. "That's me." I confirmed. He handed me an envelope and said, "You've been served, good luck." Then he turned and walked out. I opened the envelope and scanned the documents. Just as Grace had said that night, they were straightforward, no alimony requests, no surprises. I signed the papers, slipped them into the pre-addressed envelope, and dropped them in the outgoing mail tray on Kay's desk. "You getting a divorce?" she asked. "Looks like it," I replied. "Well?" "Put my name on the list. When you're ready to start looking again." I was surprised you're serious. Absolutely. As I headed back to the shop, I couldn't help but wonder what it was that other women saw in me that Grace didn't. First Wendy, then Holly, and now Katie had shown an interest. It was a bit of balm for my bruised ego, that's for sure. Later, I called Wendy and told her I'd been served and that in my mind I was officially released from my vows. She mentioned that she had a bridal shower to attend that evening, but invited me over for a celebratory dinner the next night. I told her it was a date. I was sitting at home finishing up a TV dinner when my phone rang. It was Alice. "You're a real piece of work." "Frank Keller," she said, her voice teasing. "Who?" "Me," I replied. "Playing along. I just spent the last 30 minutes listening to my sister sobbing about what you did with her jewelry. She went to Eric asking him for the 10 grand to buy back the pawn ticket from you, but he told her he didn't have the money until the next quarterly bonus over 2 months away." She was beside herself. Frank absolutely in tears, with no idea what to do since she's only got 50 days to get her things back. So I took pity on her. I told her I had the jewelry and that I'd return it to her as long as I could keep the necklace. She jumped at the offer, "So thanks to you, I've got my necklace and my sister is endlessly grateful to me." "Remember what I said. Keep in touch, all right?" I laughed. "We'll do, Alice, we'll do." Whether I actually would or not depended a lot on how things went with Wendy. Sure, we had something back in high school, but maybe that was just teenage curiosity. When I arrived at Wendy's place that evening, it was clear she had gone all out. She was wearing a stunning dress and heels, and the table was set with candles, a bottle of wine, and 2 glasses. "Perfect. Timing," she said with a smile. "Dinner's ready. If you pour the wine, I'll bring the food." She brought the plates to the table, sat down, and raised her wine glass. "Here's to new beginnings," she said, with a warm smile. I clanked my glass against hers, to new beginnings. I agreed. Dinner was delicious, and the atmosphere was romantic: candles, wine, and quiet conversation. The only thing missing was some soft music in the background. Wendy wasn't shy about where she expected the night to go. "Dessert will be in the bedroom," she said with a playful grin after we finished eating. As we undressed, she looked at me and said, "This is where I always imagined us back before my dad's promotion." She looked incredible. From there the evening progressed. We fell asleep together that night, and from then on we were pretty much a couple. I say pretty much because even though I felt free after the divorce, papers were served technically. I was still married until everything was finalized. A few times Wendy and I bumped into Grace while we were out. She kept her distance, but I could feel the hostility in the glances she threw our way. A week after the divorce was official, I got down on one knee in front of Wendy and asked her to marry me. I was in the basement working on a cradle for the twins we were expecting in about 3 months when I heard the basement door creak open, followed by my wife's voice. "He's here, honey." I finished up, put away my tools, vacuumed up the sawdust and washed my hands before heading upstairs. My father-in-law was already settled on the couch with a drink in hand thanks to my wife. She brought me a beer and then sat on my lap, sipping her margarita as we chatted, waiting for the turkey to cook. The conversation mostly revolved around the twins, whether we'd finally chosen names, and why we were so stubborn about not finding out the babies' genders before they were born. As usual, though, the conversation eventually drifted to a topic we never seemed to avoid this time. It was my father-in-law who brought it up. "So, have you heard from your sister lately?" he asked. "Not since the last time I mentioned it, have you?" "No, not a word. I just wonder what's going on with her. I'm not calling her to find out. I said if she wants to talk, she'll call me, but I'm not making the first move. The last I heard, she left him because of his cheating, and she's planning to file for divorce. Frank always said one of them would cheat within the first year of marriage." My father-in-law looked at me and I just shrugged, patting my wife's baby bump with a smile. "Doesn't matter to me." I said, "I'm the one who ended up with the prize. I've got you." He chuckled, shaking his head. "I get more free drinks at the lodge thanks to you too. I must be the only father in the state whose son-in-law married both of his daughters. I still don't get how you managed to go from Grace to Alice. And maybe it's better." "I don't know Alice." "Oh, right. I probably skipped that part of the story. See, when I proposed to Wendy, she turned me down, not in a harsh way, but it was still a no. She told me she liked me a lot and enjoyed our time together, but she didn't love me. I was disappointed, sure, but not heartbroken, which made me realize I had probably just been holding on to an old high school connection that wasn't really there anymore. I thought it would be easy to pick up where we left off, but life doesn't work that way. I moved on. Over the next few months, I started going out more, hitting bars like the Honky Tonk Hall and Trailblazer Tavern, where they had live music and line dancing. One night I was at the Stagecoach on the dance floor when I spotted Alice Turner walk in and sit at the bar. After the dance, I returned to my table, and before long Alice came over and asked if she could join me. I nodded. And she sat down right away. She asked why I hadn't called her. "Why would I have called?" I asked. "I thought I made it pretty clear when I told you I wished I'd met you before Grace. And I hinted again when I told you to stay in touch." "Well, even if I had called, how would that have worked? What about your sister and your dad? Do you think they'd be happy about it?" Alice shrugged. "I'm not living my life to make Grace or my dad happy. Grace had her chance and she threw it away. She doesn't get to tell me what I can or can't do, and as for Dad, he'll either be happy for me or he won't. Now, how about you start this courtship by asking me to dance?" Grace wasn't thrilled and Alice told her to get over it. Her dad, on the other hand, surprised me. "Glad we can keep you in the family," he said. When Alice brought me over for Sunday dinner 6 months after that night at the Stagecoach, I proposed to Alice and she said yes. 3 months later, we were married. 8 months after that, we found out I was going to be a dad, and 3 months later we learned we were having twins. Am I a happy man? You bet I am.